Welcome to Knitting the Notes with pianist and knitter Dr. B. If you are a double reed instrument player who has wondered, what kind of oboe reeds should I buy? Or, how can I tell when my reed needs replacing? This podcast is for you. It aims to answer those questions and more as we visit with Dr. Sherry Matson, my fellow co-founder of the Lake Cottage Duo and founder of Superior Oboe Reeds, LLC. Hi, Sherry. First, can you tell us something about your reed making history? When did you start making oboe reeds?
Hi, Juanita. Thanks for having me on this podcast. I started making reeds as an undergraduate oboe major. That's a late start compared to many successful oboists, but it's not unusual. But like playing the piano, it takes a long time to master reed making. I made bad reeds for several years before I gained enough knowledge and skill to be confident playing on a reed that I made myself. And I'm still learning as I assess the reeds I am making now.
Are the reeds you make now the same as what we can get at a music store?
Only if you buy really high-end reeds, which are not often available through a general music store. And then there still will be differences. Music stores must make a profit, so they have to buy wholesale and mark up prices on everything. Buying wholesale means buying from brands that make reeds in big batches using machines to do the bulk of the work. That means that generally the quality will not be high. I make my reeds individually by hand.
So, handmade reeds are better than those made by a machine?
Actually, there are three categories of reeds: machine-made reeds, hand-finished reeds, and handmade reeds. The difference is in the amount of hands-on work done on the reed. The material we make reeds out of is a type of grass musicians call cane. Every piece of cane is different, just like every piece of wood you see is different. A machine cannot vary the scrape to compensate for different pieces of cane. Also, the companies that make machine-made reeds won't make the tip of the reed thin enough because there would be too many mangled reeds. That's bad for profit. Hand-finished reeds are made mostly with machines and then improved at the end by a reed maker. They are more consistent than machine-made reeds, but still don't tailor the scrape to the piece of cane. With handmade reeds, though, thought goes into what scraping will happen. A reed maker sees and feels what the cane is like when they start scraping. You can feel when the cane is hard or soft and can change the thickness or length to compensate.
How does someone know what reed is best for them?
Machine-made reeds are often the cheapest reeds, and their categories are inconsistent. So a reed labeled as a medium reed, for instance, could be anything from a really soft reed to something that is too hard for the category. Inconsistency is okay when a beginner first starts playing because they tend to break their first reeds very quickly. And a cheap reed is, well, less expensive at this point in the learning process. A medium or medium soft reed tends to be thin too, which is also just fine for a beginner because it takes time to build up the necessary muscular embouchure. As a player is more comfortable with reeds and their embouchure settles in, it's good to have more consistency in the reeds they play. Consistency is only possible with reeds finished by hand or made by hand. Then eventually, the oboist gets pickier about reeds and needs to find reeds that work well for them. Over time, every player finds that there are things they like in a reed. Some people like thinner reeds. Some people like thick, substantial reeds. Some people like long tips on the reeds, some like short. There are other variations too. So, players who don't make their own reeds are on a constant search for a source of reeds that are perfect. Perfect for them, that is. And that's very difficult to find. The only way to get exactly what you want every time is to make your own reeds or work with a reed maker who will build custom reeds to your specifications.
So, when you are playing on a reed, how do you know if the reed is having an issue?
If you're thinking about the reed instead of the music, you need to do something about your reed. It needs to be either fixed or replaced. Fixing reeds is something that we don't have time to go into today. You can contact me through my website, superioroboreeds.com, for some tips on fixing reeds. You can also find replacement reeds there.
How does someone know a reed that is still working is too old and needs to be replaced?
As a reed ages, the cane starts to break down. It gets brittle, it loses its shape, the tip flattens out and the interior space narrows, and it stops vibrating easily. Symptoms of this include poor response, higher pitch, low notes that don't speak, and downward leaps under a slur that don't work. If you want a time limit, I play a good reed approximately 10 hours before I consider it old. Of course, like most oboists, I've been fixing my reeds during that time, so the reed is shorter and thinner by that point. I've pretty much fixed it out of existence. Someone who doesn't fix reeds can probably play on a good reed about 20 to 25 hours before it stops vibrating. But if you think you have to break in a new reed, you're playing too long on the old reed. There's no such thing as breaking in a reed. What's really going on is you are changing your embouchure to get the old reeds to work.
So playing on old reeds can impact the embouchure?
Yes, old reeds that don't vibrate well will cause the player to slowly change their embouchure. They have to use a looser embouchure to allow the old reed to vibrate and to compensate for inevitable sharpness. They can't blow much air at it because an old reed becomes weak and will come apart at the sides with the loose embouchure and too much air pressure. So when the player starts using a new reed, the embouchure they've been using for the old one won't work. They have to change their embouchure again, and they might go back to their original embouchure and air production, but it might evolve into something incorrect. And that's a big problem, which will require a lot of time and effort to fix once you realize it's happening.
If you are not making your own reeds but buying reeds, what is the best practice for how many reeds you should own at one time? Do you rotate through them?
You should have at least 3 reeds that are working well in your reed case. One should be new, and you should have 1 or 2 old backup reeds just in case something terrible happens to your reed case. I'd also keep 1 brand new reed that hasn't been played in reserve too. That means at least 6 reeds all the time. I keep 10 to 12 working reeds in my case at all times. And yes, you should play on a different reed each time you play. This will help your reeds to last longer, and it will keep your embouchure flexible.
Well, that is all very interesting. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. If people have questions for you, can you remind us how they can reach you?
Yes, you can contact me through my website, superioroboreeds.com. There's a spot where you can find an email on the contact page.
Thank you for listening to Knitting the Notes with Dr. B.